Joseph Vissarionovich Jugashvili was born on December 21st, Old Style December 9th, 1879, or maybe December 18th, Old Style December 6th, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, in the Russian Empire. Roughly 5,000 people called the town home at the time. His parents, Ekaterina and Vissarion, were both from serf families, and the latter was a shoemaker. He came from generations of shoemakers. Due to the early industrialism in the area, Vissarion was now employed at a boot factory in Tiflis, the capital, where he worked 10 to 12-hour days for little pay. Joseph would later say his parents did not treat him badly, but this is contradicted by some sources who say his father was physically abusive and a heavy drinker. Describing their home, author J.T. Murphy said, quote, "Their home in the little Georgian town of Gori was a very humble affair comprising a living room 5 yards square, adjoining a kitchen. The living room had one small window. The floor was of brick, the walls of wood. An oil lamp stood on a table in the middle of the room. A large sofa covered with a straw pallet stood on one side, and a sideboard with a samovar on the other. 3 wooden stools and a stove completed the furnishings. It had no doorstep, and the door led straight into a cobblestone alley, down which trickled a dirty stream. Across the alley were more shanties with their inevitable stovepipes poking out irregularly from roofs and walls. To say his upbringing was a modest one would be an understatement, and later on, he would always try to talk and write in a way that was easy for ordinary workers to follow. The Tsarist regime was reactionary, oppressive, and brutal. The peasantry it ruled over was largely illiterate and lived in misery. The Russian Empire was mostly agrarian and semi-feudal. Poor harvests and famines were relatively common, and there were hunger revolts. The tools and methods of cultivation the peasants were limited to were primitive and outdated. Quote, "Compared to France or to Belgium, the majority of peasants lived in 1900 as in the 14th century. Martens. New productive forces were coming about from early Russian capitalism, however, including large factories, railroads, and banks. These were largely foreign-owned. Joseph, or Soso as his mother called him, contracted smallpox when he was 7, leaving him with lasting marks on his face. In the following years, during his school days in Gori, he would get blood poisoning, which affected his left arm. His father insisted he become a cobbler, but his mother wanted him to go to school, and she went out. He attended the church day school of Gori from the ages of 8 to 14, where he was a good student, noted for his memory and intelligence. The lessons were now mostly in Russian, starting in 1890, just like every other school in the empire. Georgians were a subject group in the Russian Empire, and this was only one manifestation of it. Cossack soldiers were a common sight near the mountains, and Tsarist officials were always around. When he was around 11, his father died, supposedly stabbed in a drunken fight, leaving Ekaterina to raise him alone. She reportedly had treasured him from the moment he was born, and he was fond of her throughout her life. She sewed and washed clothes for neighbors to make ends meet. Before he was 14, he read Darwin's Origin of Species and The Descent of Man, obtained from a library in Tiflis. He came to no longer believe in the religious teachings he had received. He supposedly told a friend, quote, "You know, they are fooling us. There is no God." Murphy. However, he continued on at the church school and did not tell his religious mother about his new views. She hoped that he would become a priest, but later on, when it was clear this would not happen, she accepted it and still considered him her good boy. He was a big reader and would end up taking his nickname Koba from the character of the same name, a mountain rebel featured in Kazbigi's stories. It would be the name he used most often until roughly 1910, when he went by Koba Stalin, and then eventually Joseph Stalin. Quote, "When he left the Gori school in 1894, he was recommended as the best student for entrance in the Tiflis Seminary, the most important institution of higher learning in Georgia, as well as a center of opposition to Tsarism." Martens. Of course, this was true for the students, not the monks in charge, who were strict and repressive. The church was a tool of the Russian government, after all. The students were not allowed to belong to a public library, possess forbidden books, or have meetings that didn't involve the curriculum. The teachers spied on them, searched through their belongings, and reported anything suspicious. Before Joseph began attending, the school had sometimes closed due to anti-Russian demonstrations by the students, and a student even once killed a rector who was vocally anti-Georgian. In November 1896, this was entered into the conduct book. Quote, "It seems that Jugashvili has a ticket to the cheap library, from which he borrows books. Today I confiscated Victor Hugo's Toilers of the Sea, in which I found the said library ticket." Murphy. He was ultimately caught with books considered subversive on at least 13 occasions, and was confined in one of the school's punishment cells multiple times, including on the day of that entry. He liked to read, both books and poetry, and refused to limit himself to material the monks approved of. Of course, he was certainly not outspoken in his atheism, as he would have been swiftly expelled for that. He had no interest in becoming a priest, but he did want to learn, and his time at the seminary provided a good opportunity. Tiflis was the center of Georgian intellectual life. He eventually became acquainted with a group of Marxists in the city. Through them, he was introduced to works by Marx and Engels, Plekhanov, Kautsky, Adam Smith, and others. He would later learn about Lenin from the group, and read his early work. It was not necessarily easy to obtain things like Marx's Capital, and a single copy was supposedly passed around, hand-copied, and read aloud. He joined the first Marxist social democratic group in Georgia, Mesima Dasi, the third group, which was a legal organization. Marxism provided a solid explanation for what he had experienced, what was going on around him, and beyond. He would say much later, quote, "I became a Marxist thanks, one may say, to my social position. My father was an operative in a shoe factory, and my mother too was a worker, and also because there was a stir of revolt in the milieu in which I moved, which was of the same social level as my parents, and finally, because of Jesuitic repression and Martinet intolerance of the Orthodox Church Seminary where I spent some years. The whole atmosphere around me was saturated with hatred of Tsarist oppression, and I threw myself wholeheartedly into revolutionary work." He soon formed Marxist study groups, and eventually became the leader of one in the seminary itself. On September 29, 1898, the rector received a report saying, quote, "At 9 p.m., a group of students gathered in the dining hall around Joseph Jugashvili, who read them books not sanctioned by the seminary authorities, in view of which the student was searched." Murphy. He was supposedly expelled on May 27th the following year, the school claiming he had missed exams for an unknown reason. Joseph would later say he was expelled for propagating Marxism, while his mother would claim she took him out for his health. A few months prior, he had become a founding member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party's Tiflis branch. He had also read Lenin in the time before leaving the school, the first work apparently being his article, "Who are the Friends of the People and How They Fight Against the Social Democrats," in a paper published by the St. Petersburg League for the Emancipation of the Working Class. According to Murphy, quote, "Whatever else he had learned in his college days, he had acquired a preciseness of utterance and an analytical method of thinking which made him an outstanding figure among his fellow students. When he saw the article by this hitherto, to him, unknown writer, it was these qualities in it which at once appealed to him. Needless to say, he was impressed, and became a big fan of Lenin's, reading anything of his he came across." Another student at the seminary later recalled finding a group of students gathered around Joseph one morning in 1898 as he was criticizing the views of the Georgian leader of the Social Democratic group, Jordania. This criticism had been informed by an article of Lenin's he had recently read. As he handed the article to his friend, Kapanadze, he said, quote, "I must meet him at all costs." Murphy.